In a previous video, you may have seen a Adept shaper on the floor of the workshop. I was getting in the position to look about restoring it. I think it's probably time to get on with that. So let's get to it. So here is the Adept No. 2 automatic shaper. So I've got my Abwood vise over here, which just about fits onto the table, but it's slightly oversized, but will do for now. And the first thing that needs to happen, I think, really, is probably just to get this working again. You see it's got a normal 3-pin plug, and it's got a period MK light switch here on and off to turn it on and off. Now there's lots of really elegant ways I could potentially mount this with the motor underneath and so on, but I think actually what might be most prudent upon reflection is to mount it to a sled of sorts. So here's my 3/4 inch piece of plywood. Thinking I'm just going to cut down this line here, and that is approximately the correct length that I can mount the shaper to this, and I can mount the motor to this as well. And I could potentially have fixing holes that go through here into the bench underneath to secure it into place. In true Williams workshop fashion, I've got myself a nice old saw. And to ensure it's sharp, I've got saw files and a setting tool, but I think this one is set up well. It's a cross-cut saw, so it should work well for the plywood. Let's get going. I thought I'd give it a quick whiz around with some white spirit, and this blue is cleaned up quite nicely. It's quite a dark blue compared to my voice in the background. It's almost like a Prussian blue. And then we got grey here on the base, and that grey kind of matches what's on the ram. There's evidence of green on the ram, but I wonder if that is either just spilt paint or some kind of primer, which would make sense. Sorry for the handheld camera here, but this whole unit, minus the blue sections, would have been how the hand version of this machine would have been delivered. In fact, in the ram, you can still see the slot where the handle would have gone through the ram, and it goes through a second lever arm, and then it ends up here, and this is a boss that's not used for anything on this machine as far as I'm aware, but that's where that would go. So maybe they were all built grey, and then, or whatever this green is, hammerite green or something, and then all the motor mechanisms were built separately and put on them. Or alternatively, this is two different halves of a machine, half from a blue machine and half from a grey machine. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to repaint this when I do. I quite like that dark blue, but if you have any ideas, let me know. Here's the base casting. Here's the various bits for the cross feed, and this is for the lead screw over here. Over here we've got the bull gear with the slides over there, and some of the mounting mechanisms over in the background. Here is the vast majority of the rest. So here's the table and the pulley. There's the ram. That's everything to do with the clapper, and that's part of the bull gear arm assembly. A little side bracket over there, and then the cross slide over here. So it's all incredibly filthy. I guess the benefit of that means that there's unlikely to be much in the way of rust inside the moving parts, because it's just completely drenched in oil and grease. So let's get it cleaned up. I've never used one of these before. It's a parts washer. I'm using some water-based degreaser in there, and I think it's probably the best solution for the really greasy parts. So I am going to I'll do the ram. The ram's a nice big piece, and we can see what it looks like. Well, I'm pretty happy with how that's gone. You can see the ram here. I don't really know exactly what happened. You can see there's a little bit of blue paint here, and I did hypothesize this was two different machines, but it looks like someone has just painted over the top of the blue in whatever that grey was. Or that could be primer, I guess, but it was on top of the blue. Either way, the degreaser has taken a lot of that off, which has saved me a bit of time. I'm obviously going to paint strip the rest, but now I know it's degreased, there should be a lot less work for the paint stripper to do. Then I'll give it another clean, and then a derust in evaporust, I think. And that's going to be the same for the majority of these parts. So I'll bring you back when I'm doing some of the big stuff, because it's probably quite fun to watch it in there. But other than that, I'll bring you back when these parts are cleaned and derusted. So my hope is that since this is degreased, this paint stripper will have less work to do, which means it should happen quicker, it should require less abrasion and a few other things. These pieces have already started to get a bit of rust on them, and I think that's because obviously degreased and dry, suddenly they're very, very susceptible to moisture. That's what's happening, but I'm not an expert. So you can see here the ram. So what this has had is had the degreaser on it, then a bit of paint stripper after about 20 minutes, then a bit of a rinse off and a bit of a scrub. Not all of it came off easily. There was some fighting. You can see around here, it looks like there's been a repair. I don't know if there's been a crack or something, but definitely like maybe a void in the casting that someone's tried to fill up. But just in general, it's come out pretty well. So I'm gonna have to repeat that for all of the pieces. I'll just pan you across. See, there's quite a few to get through. It's not really conducive to filming. Basically, under the water, scrub with a brush, and it comes out like the ram. So let me get all of these to this condition, and then I'll come back to you. All right, we've got the vast majority of the paint stripped off. There are a few hard to get bits, like down here or down inside there, but I think in the grand scheme of things, that'll be all right. I haven't got a sandblaster or something, so we're just going to work with what we've got. Righto, I think we've got everything that needs to be painted, primed. It's going to need a couple of coats of undercoat and then a couple of coats of top coat. I'm using some dark red high build undercoat. I've gone with black for the outer face of the shaper and red for the sections which are kind of internal. What I would like to do is do some lettering, because we've got some raised lettering here, and it could do with being picked out. So let's go do that. So what I'm using is a Q-tip dipped in the paint, and the idea is to dab it vertically on the surface and hopefully get an imprint on the top surface and not down into the recesses. And there we go. I think that's been relatively successful. Maybe a bit less so on this side where the lettering is really quite small. There's not much in the way of surface area. I'm actually going to touch up a few areas with a bit of black enamel. There's the between the E and the N there, there's a tiny bit of overlap. So I'll clean that up. But I'm going to do that through the rest of the machine. Hopefully it'll look quite fancy, really. This is the method I've gone for mounting the shaper, that is to put it on a fairly large sled of sorts. This is 2 feet deep, which is about the right size to mount the shaper base on the front and the motor on the back and get a reasonable belt tension. It may be that I then need to fasten this to the workbench with some lugs, but I think actually this should be significantly heavy enough. It's pretty heavy with the motor and the base on. By the time everything's on there, I don't think this is going anywhere, particularly at least with reference to the amount of material and the kind of forces that are going to be applied on the shaper itself. I think you'll agree it's looking quite good. What I have started to do is some surfaces, like the end of this boss here, is I'm just cleaning them up with some very, very high grit abrasive paper. So starting at 800, going up to 2,500, just to get a nicer surface finish. I'm being very, very careful not to take off very much material at all, and literally just to polish it. I don't know how well you can see, but I've done that on the dovetails here on the ram. and I think that's coming out quite nicely. So I'll do that on the bare metal parts, mostly for vanity, but also plausibly to make it more difficult for corrosion to take hold. Let's get this thing back together. I'm just tidying up the top slide here, and what's interesting is you can see some machining patterns in there. This has obviously been faced off on a lathe, and there's quite a few square parts that are like that. So this machine is 1920s, 1930s, but the motorized version was 1950s, I think, early 50s. But yeah, they're still using a lathe to square up their pieces of stock. It's interesting. Have a bit of a confession to make here. I've tried doing this video of reassembling the shaper, but I have forgotten how it goes together. So actually it's just a lot of me thinking and holding my chin and staring at these parts. So we're gonna have a graceful fade out, and when we come back, it'll be reassembled. This is how far we've got in that first evening of reassembly. So we have the table back on the shaper base, and we have the ram and the top slide all in. So this is all in place. So that's good. But this is essentially kind of what you'd get if you had the hand shaper version. I think the pivot arm would have been attached here, and it would have gone through this hole in the ram and attached over this side. But that's more or less what it would have looked like. Of course, I've got the motor and a few pulleys, and there's these shafts here, and a big pile of kind of miscellaneous, anonymously shaped bits of metal to try and reassemble this to. It's looking pretty good, I think. And there we go, it's back together again. I'd like to say there was only a mild amount of Anglo-Saxon verbiage going on there, but there was actually quite a significant amount. Now this is all back together again, it's working manually, so it's time to get the motor reattached. Let's do that. I hope you've enjoyed this brief sojourn into the Adept No. 2 automatic shaper. There are a few little things I'll need to do to this to make it a bit better and to try and fix the a little bit more reliable crossfeed on the carriage here. It's not perfect in one direction. It looks like the tool post has been modified in some way, which is fine, but I'd like to have an original tool post or one to the original design, so I'm going to machine that. I also need to kind of test the limits of the machine. I know Mr. Factotum has done a great video where he's taking quite large cuts, a couple of mil, with his machine. I don't think I can get to that on this, just because I'm a bit of an amateur really. But I do need to tighten up all the gibs and try and make some bigger cuts and things. None of which is particularly entertaining to watch as a video. So what I'm going to do is stop the video here, and then next time you see this, I'll be using it when I'm making one of my various projects, and we'll see it in action there. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll join me again soon.